All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, KJ Ramsey. KJ, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So KJ is a trauma-informed licensed professional counselor and author whose work offers space to see every part of our souls and stories as sacred. She holds degrees from Covenant College and Denver Seminary and is the author of 3 books, The Lord is My Courage, Stepping Through the Shadows of Fear Toward the Voice of Love, as well as This Too Shall Last, Finding Grace When Suffering Lingers, and most recently, the Book of Common Courage, Prayers and Poems to Find Strength in Small Moments. KJ writes at the intersection of theology, psychology, and spiritual formation to guide readers in recovering the rhythm of resilience through nervous system regulation and the wonder of communion with God. Awesome, KJ. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome. We got a lot of smoke going on there. You smudging?
I do. I light some Palo Santo before every therapy session, which I do right here, and then with every interview too. Just
cool.
kind of
awesome.
a transition ritual for me.
Before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah, I am originally from Michigan. I spent my first 17 years of life in Michigan outside of Flint. And I live in Denver, Colorado, where I've been for the last decade.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's jump in here. How did you get to this place, this space, such that you're writing about and at the intersection of these topics?
Yeah, I like to talk about all the time that the way is through the wound, the way to wholeness, the way to who we're going to become. And that's the story for me of both being a therapist and being an author and a poet. The way has been through my own wounds as somebody who experienced complex trauma as a child, as somebody who's experienced religious trauma, as a disabled woman. The way to having words to share and a presence to share has been through bearing witness to my own wounds and my own weariness.
How did you manage the trauma as a young kid? How did you manage it? How did you deal with it? Did you deal with it?
It's a little hilarious that I am an author, because the way that I coped, the way that I found safety as a child was in books. I was surrounded by a lot of chaos and experienced a lot of abuse in my family. And I would just go straight into books. I taught myself how to read at 3, and I just always had a book. I always had a book with me. And it was, now as a trauma therapist, I know I was really dissociating into books and able to block everything or a lot out. But I'm so grateful that I had that safe place to imagine a different story and imagine love and safety and different kind of consistency. Of course, there was love in my family too, but it was quite complex. So it really wasn't until becoming a therapist that I really started to name how much trauma is in my whole story, and started to, really be honest with myself about my own distress and dysregulation, as cries for consistency and connection and solidarity. So it's been a long, long process.
So between the time when you began to name it and recognize it, and the time when you taught yourself to read, did you share what was going on with other people? Did you reach out to a therapist? What
Yeah,
did you do?
I mean, as a very young kid, I remember silencing myself out of a sense of shame. I remember with some of the nature of the abuse that happened, with some sexual abuse. I remember having this sense like I can't tell anybody because if our pastor knows, it's my fault. Like as a 5-year-old thinking that. And so I really swallowed so much of my story and swallowed like my own need for comfort. My older brother was very, very, very dysregulated all the time and required so much of my parents' attention. And I took on the role of being the good girl who, brought them joy instead of pain. So I coped through this hypervigilance and this hyper performance. And it really wasn't until truthfully, there's moments maybe throughout high school that I started to get honest with people, but at that point still had never seen a therapist myself. It wasn't really until I was in college and I started to see my roommates and my friends and meet some of their families and realized, oh, like the way that I grew up wasn't normal.
Mm-hmm.
No, other people's families aren't all like this. Other people don't have these kinds of expectations placed on them. And I started to see a therapist in college. And around that same time is when I got sick with my first autoimmune disease. And so I was concurrently having to face my body asking for help and being suddenly disabled in a way that required me to have help.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to navigate my days and get what I needed to just have sustenance and like make it around my dorm room without physical help from others. So there was this very quick shift of having to ask for the things that I never thought I was allowed to ask for as a child. And that was really the beginning of being put on a trajectory of truth telling with myself about what my body has to say and what she deserves and needs. So yeah, it's been, like I said, a long story, long story.
I noticed that you said that when you were in college, there was a moment there where you began to be honest with yourself, and you almost in the same sentence, you said that was kind of around the first time where you experienced you were getting sick. Do you connect those dots in any way?
Of course, yes.
You do.
I mean, there's in my family, on both sides, there's a massive epigenetic layer with autoimmune disease. And so it's a very complex thing. But now at this juncture in my story, I really believe that my body was processing both my own experience of childhood trauma and I think generations before me of trauma that was not tended to, and that I was being given an opportunity to change the story. And because of the severe disabling nature of my disease, it, in a way, forced me to choose wholeness. It made it easier in a way to choose wholeness because I was so desperate to be well. And I think there's a grace there. But yeah, I think my body really, I don't know that we can nail down how this complex interplay between our physicality and our immune systems and the various genes that we are passed down, and the emergence of a new disease state. But I think that our bodies tell very fierce truths about the systems in which we live, including our family systems and the systems of the institutions in which we are embedded and the broader societal systems. And I think my body was telling some very inconvenient and fierce truths that we are not made to be self-sufficient, and that we are worthy of care and witnessing. And she just asked for it, and she continues to ask for it.
How did things unfold for you when you started to see a therapist, when you were in college? And what was the path towards becoming a therapist like for you? How did that start?
Yeah, I did not plan on becoming a therapist. With the whole like reading young thing, I've always been a nerd. And I was working in community development, doing research and training and marketing for a nonprofit. And I again found myself, so this is right after college, I found myself in a system that was not well, led by somebody who honestly has a lot of narcissistic qualities. And I got sicker. And it was that second time of starting therapy again. At first, trying to find someone, and I struggled to find someone who I didn't have to explain so much about my daily existence as a woman. At the time, I wouldn't have had the label disabled, but as a disabled woman, what my life looks like. But when I found a therapist who herself had a chronic illness, I felt this relaxation of like, she gets it. I knew by watching her body that she lives like I do. And there was so much I didn't have, this wasn't the language that I had at the time, in my early 20s, but I didn't have to re-traumatize myself by retelling everything about what my life is like and how I got to that point in order to be loved and witnessed. And seeing her be able to have a career and offer the presence that people need opened up this window of possibility for me that I could do that too. And I in my job, I was really wanting to go deeper. We were a poverty alleviation organization, all about helping the poor help themselves, quote unquote. And I just felt like I want to get to the poverty underneath everything, the poverty of personhood that we all experience. And so, yeah, I ended up becoming a therapist because really of practicality, of having to quit my job and wondering, am I ever going to be able to have a regular career? I don't think I am. And what can I do? Mm-hmm. And really that pragmatism propelled me into a vocation that I could not have imagined would be such a perfect fit for who I am and what I love and how I'm wired. And it became so much more.
So you mentioned the connection with this woman, this kind of seeing yourself in there and almost being empowered, and saying, okay, maybe I can do this. But was there any sense of, well, maybe I can help people too?
Absolutely, yes, because I knew.
And I say that not that you didn't want to do that, but given your own background, your own experience with trauma, was that a conscious thing or not?
It was. I was not to the point of being able to name that I experienced a lot of trauma. I probably at that point would have only named, and my therapist at the time wasn't trauma informed, even though she was very kind and present. She didn't have language for it at that time either. She probably does now. So much has changed in the last 16 years. But I did know I was young and sick, and that there were other people out there like me, but that we all feel so alone, and it's really hard to find each other and to see that like you're not the only one who's struggling. So yes, my reason to become a therapist was pragmatic for myself, but also a, a really out of advocacy. I wanted to advocate for people like me who need to access care, but when they go and try to, are essentially treated in such a way that they don't want to stay, that it's not safe enough to stay, without, a therapist meaning to act in ways that are offensive or are re-traumatizing. That is what happens for a lot of us. And at the time, I only really had a vision for being able to work with people with chronic illnesses. And it really was through further therapy on my own of getting in touch with my story and seeing the way that my childhood really was traumatic and continues to play an active role in how my nervous system perceives reality, that I started to see like, oh, every person that I see pretty much has childhood trauma, and like the way that our nervous systems have been shaped by these stories of neglect and harm is part of how we are somaticizing our experiences today, even as I greatly respect the medical field as well. So yeah, it was both pragmatic and a matter of advocacy that led me to become a therapist.
All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. So when you started seeing clients, what was your experience like when you began to work with people who you realized had experienced trauma?
Yeah, I think I felt I felt at home in a strange way. I have always, since the beginning of my career, felt a strange, soothing quality of sitting with someone else who is daring to be honest that they're not okay and that things have happened that are not okay. And instead of, I think I was a bit surprised that it felt as, that I felt like this is the home where I belong. Instead of, I remember, in training, people talking about, oh, it's so hard not to like carry this home with me at the end of the day, or it's hard not to, I don't know, like over function and over care. There was just something about I think the dynamic of having my own severe physical pain and limitations paired with having to be somebody who's in the position of needing care and having to be honest about what my life actually looks like, that it like is almost a counterbalance to the way that we often start out our careers, and that like I couldn't overfunction as much because my body doesn't let me. So there was just this like a solidarity and a soothing experience of seeing people be as honest as I have to be, and seeing that like something of my personhood of letting myself be a whole being with wounds, with needs, with limitations is inherently healing for the person in front of me. There's just a duality and a parallel process that happens in that experience of presence that immediately felt like home, and has only become more home as I've like really learned how to, practice this art. But yeah.
Wow. You have an amazing way of articulating your experience. It's awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So talk to us about how the books came about.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So, turns out most people don't love writing papers in college, but I did. And like I loved like staying up all night and and just working on something and getting onto EBSCOhost and researching, like looking up citations in different studies and seeing the way that things connect. And so I knew that something about like putting words together, I love more than the average person. There's delight there. And so there were two things that led me to start writing publicly and with the goal of writing my first book, just joy and anger. Joy was the delight, the great wonder, the sense of wonder that I feel in connecting the dots between disparate things that seem disparate. The great joy in just naming things, and then and naming my own experience too. And then anger in seeing the way the world is and seeing the stories that we have had to swallow to survive, and that I don't want us to have to swallow them anymore. And joy and anger compelled me to try to start telling my story publicly. And, I started writing in kind of like online publications and started to share little snippets on Instagram. And I really wanted to write this is, very cliche. This is what most authors say, but with my first book, This Too Shall Last, I wanted to write the book that I wished I could have had when I was 20 years old and sick as hell. And no one around me seemed to be struggling as much as I was. And I fucking didn't know what to do. I felt so alone and I felt so scared. And I needed a way to see that story reflected in somebody else, but also to start to shed some of the spiritual stories that were reinforcing my passivity or my victimhood, to shed that. And really my work as an author ever since, I think in large part it's the work of helping people grieve. That's what shedding is, like grieve, let go of these things that you think you have to say or do or be to be loved, and be allowed to be you, like be as you are today. So that's how I started writing the first book. And I didn't really think like it happened faster than I had anticipated. I thought this was, it's really hard to get books published, and it kind of came about faster. And, 3 years, it's been 3 years since the first book came out, and I can't believe that there's 3 now. But I'm really grateful. I love what I get to do. It's like pure joy. There's a lot of like really painful moments, and it's exhausting, but it's also such joy to help people have words for the parts of their lives that they feel wordless about.
Let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with KJ Ramsey. Her most recent book is called The Book of Common Courage, Prayers and Poems to Find Strength in Small Moments. So this was released this year. Who's this book for?
Yeah, this book is especially for people who have experienced minimization in Christian spirituality, who feel displaced in their faith, and who feel like they don't know how to have a faith and be a whole person. And that it's really my permission slip of your whole body, your embodied self, including your distress, are sacred. And you are allowed to bring that whole self into relationship with others and with God. And that maybe the God that we've been given a picture of in so much of white evangelicalism is actually some cruel tyrant picture that's not actually God. And we can let that God die to let this other God, who is love, who is the connection between all of us, who values each person in every form of who they are, that we could discover that God is actually here and cares, hears us. That's who the book is really for. I've been really delighted, though, to see that, like, even some people who wouldn't say that they're Christians or aren't exactly in that spot find the words to be welcoming. That's been really cool. You know, there's a lot of Jesus in here, but it's a lot of pointing out Jesus as a real human being who had a panic attack in the Garden of Gethsemane and who had his friends betrayed him and, you know, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Like Jesus who felt abandoned. I'm trying to introduce people to a different God, but really that yourself is somebody who is actually sacred.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we're kind of winding down here, and I'd love to bring you back. I'd love to invite you back to.
I would love that. Yes, there's so much like modalities and stuff like that we didn't even talk about. But
yeah, and I would really appreciate that. But share with our listeners, KJ, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way to get in contact with me and find my books and all the things is kjramsey.com. And I'm on all social media, but especially Instagram. It's my favorite, at KJ Ramsey Writes.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to be sure to follow you. Well, look, it was a pleasure meeting you. And I'm going to quickly add you to my callback list after we jump off of here. I appreciate that, KJ. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.